Reading a power fantasy can be a blast. In the right dose, it's enjoyable to see a character wreck all their enemies, have all the luck with their love lives, and just generally, succeed. The key part, though, is the dosage. If you go too far into the power fantasy, things become boring, because we know our hero will never fail. They're too perfect. Also, it just becomes cringy. As a general rule, if an author is trying to make their perfect, cool character without any flaws, it probably means that other elements of their storytelling will ooze with obnoxiousness. Today, though, I'll be talking about the glorious exception to this rule. A story whose protagonist dives deep into the well of power fantasy and takes all the benefits that it can grant. The badass fights, the harem, the admiration and respect of everyone, and somehow does so without the story becoming boring or cringy. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present The Eminence in Shadow. So, for any of you who are unfamiliar with The Eminence in Shadow, let me give you a brief recap of its premise. The protagonist, Sid, is a major chunibyo with but a single ambition: to become a powerful shadow broker like the ones he's seen in his favorite series. The person in the story who is secretly manipulating everything behind the scenes and will only be revealed to the heroes at the 11th hour. The masked man you might see casually sipping a rosé while giving cryptic instructions, or wistfully playing Moonlight Sonata at night by an open window. Now, to become that character, you might think that Sid would be trying to polish up his evil genius skills, but nah. He has in his head that the Shadow Broker must be the most powerful. So he goes ahead and learns every martial art, and goes Batman on biker gangs and other criminals. Then, he comes to the conclusion that he won't really be successful until he can stop a nuke with his bare hands, which obviously isn't physically possible. He decides to try and learn magic, and while he has no luck on Earth in his pursuit of it, he gets truck-cunned and reincarnated in a world with magic. In the new magical world, Sid becomes just as overpowered as he always dreamed of, and manages to accidentally start his own secret organization. How do you accidentally start a secret organization, you might ask? Well, it's quite easy. First, you rescue a demented blob from bandits, cure the blob into a beautiful elf girl, tell said elf girl some made-up story about starting an organization to fight the Cult of Diablos, have the entire story you made up miraculously happen to be true, and then let the elf girl recruit members into what becomes a massively powerful secret organization. Barely an inconvenience. With the background out of the way, what makes Eminence in Shadow a great power fantasy? Well, it makes fun of power fantasies while still reaping all the benefits of being a power fantasy. Or put simply, it manages to both have its cake and eat it too. Now, how does it do this? Largely through split perspectives. From our protagonist, Sid's perspective, we get a glorious comedy from all his self-aware chunibyo antics. And if that was all it was, it would still be great. That being said, when the story is narrated from anyone other than Sid, we quickly come to realize that the world building for this story is also top-notch. The author has put a lot of thought into the history of the world, its politics, and its magic. Throughout the story so far, and especially in Volume 4, there have been some really surprising reveals about what actually is going on in the background behind Sid's antics. This then means that we are not only invested in the story because of the laughs we get through Sid's send-up of power fantasy tropes, but are also given a good reason to genuinely care about the effects of what Sid's doing and engage sincerely with those same tropes. There were no shortage of times where this series both had me laughing out loud and then thinking a few moments later, damn, that was an awesome fight scene. I can't wait to find out what happens next. This duality wouldn't be possible if we engaged with the world purely through Sid's perspective. It's a bit too quirky to allow for anything other than comedy. Because we get equal time for characters who take the story's world seriously, it allows us, as the readers, to take it seriously as well. So, now that I've established how this story has its cake and eats it too, let's dive a bit more into what makes its comedy tick, as just saying it satirizes power fantasy tropes is really selling it short. Eminence in Shadow has three main avenues of hilarity. The first, and most obvious one, is Sid's straightforward approach to checking off his Shadow Broker bucket list. Seeing his casual approach, meta-commentary, and outright excitement towards events that all other characters are freaking out about is golden. As an example from early in the story, incredible! I involuntarily utter in awe. These guys did it! I mean, they're really going for it. They're doing what all boys in the world dream about, what fills a page in the fantasies of boyhood adolescence. They're reenacting the scenario where terrorists take over the school. Yeah, just golden. The next avenue of humor is Sid's whole background character shtick. You see, as part of role-playing as a shadow broker, he thinks it's incredibly important to act like as generic a background character as possible, while not acting as edgelord-in-chief. The problem is he kind of sucks at it. Oh sure, he's decent at making people think he's not a threat. He goes to absurd lengths in that regards, with his mob foo, 48 ways to lose battle in style. However, in trying to be as generic and bland as possible, he walked straight into typical harem protagonist territory. Before the end of even the first volume of the series, he's already managed to accidentally make two princesses, the world's top scholar, and a decent chunk of the girls in the secret organization he formed accidentally fall in love with him. His unwanted luck with girls is a sight to behold. Lastly, and on a related note, Sid's luck is perhaps the series' best source of humor, and not in the poor luck leading to slapstick kind of way. Quite the opposite, in fact. Sid's luck seems to have a will of its own, and will be as absurd as it needs to be to make him look like a genius. Make up a story about an evil cult? Well, guess what? It actually exists. Throw a knife at a map? Well, what do you know? There just happens to be a secret base there. Jump in front of a truck while following headlights in search of magic? Of course, that leads to a fantasy world. Why wouldn't it? Throughout the story, most of Sid's decision-making process is random or half-assed at best, but everyone just assumes he's a genius, which from their perspective makes sense. Sid's a good actor, and somehow all his choices just work, even when they're insanely stupid. The gap between what other people think is going on in his mind and the vacuum that is actually there is a long-running joke in this series, and it never gets old. Now, just because Eminence in Shadow is the greatest power fantasy ever doesn't mean it's without its flaws. The characters get introduced way too quickly. By the end of the first volume, and just looking at Sid's harem, the main cast of recurring characters has already swelled to include Claire, Alpha, Beta, Delta, Gamma, Epsilon, Nu, Alexia, Rose, and Sherry. While most of these characters do get more developed in future volumes, it's a slow process, with limited time to go around, especially with the cast and Sid's harem continuing to grow in later volumes. More than making this series bad, I just feel like there's some lost potential. I've come to quite like Beta, who's one of the few characters on that list who actually got a decent amount of time spent on her, and I'd be quite happy to see the cast list slimmed down a bit if it meant more of them were developed at least to her level. Anyways, minor criticism aside, if it wasn't already extremely obvious, I highly recommend reading this series. Not only is Eminence in Shadow a great comedy, it's just plain a great story. I am slowly dying inside waiting for Volume 5 of this series to come out and then get translated into English. If you're in a similar position to me and waiting for the next volume of Eminence in Shadow to come out, I highly recommend Tear Moon Empire in the meantime. Like Eminence in Shadow, the whole mistaken genius from an absurd luck gag runs strong in this series, and I suspect you'll find its protagonist, Mia, at least as funny as Sid. Thank you all for listening to this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Cheers!